Okay, so welcome everyone to Lamsa's Wednesday webinar series. My name is Zoya. I am a senior psychology student at UB. I am currently studying abroad at Amherst College in the States. I am an ambassador at Lamsa and a mental health and psychosocial supporter at Bibler Beirut. So our topic for this webinar is social anxiety disorder and substance abuse. Let me first talk about Lamsa. So the Lebanese Association for Medical Services of Addiction focuses on promoting awareness and education around mental health and addiction. So during this webinar, I am going to talk about what is social anxiety disorder, the symptoms, triggers, risk factors, what is the connection between social anxiety and substance abuse, and finally, the alternative ways to deal with social anxiety. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation, and we will have time at the end for questions, remarks, and everything you want to talk about. So let's start. What is social anxiety disorder? So being nervous or shy in some social situations, like going on a first date or giving a presentation, is part of being human. In certain situations, we tend to feel uncomfortable or stressed. And the way we attend to these feelings depends first on personality traits. For example, individuals who are more extroverted would be more comfortable with the idea of going out with a big group of friends than individuals who are more introverted. Second, it depends on life experiences. The more you stand and talk in front of a big crowd, the less stressed you become with time. So when does it actually become something called social anxiety disorder, which is also called social phobia? In social anxiety disorder, everyday interactions cause significant anxiety. The person becomes more self-conscious and has a strong fear of being embarrassed or judged negatively by others. So this fear and anxiety lead the person to avoid social situations for more than 6 months. And this avoidance will interfere and disrupt relationships, daily routines, work, or school. Social anxiety disorder begins on average at the age of 13, but it can sometimes start in childhood or older adults. So symptoms can be categorized between emotional and behavioral and physical. For the emotional and behavioral symptoms, other than the ones I mentioned already, a person might be scared of other people noticing the physical symptoms they're having, like sweat or trembling. And so the person might try to hide in some places, for example, in the bathroom if you're outside. And the person might even avoid going out altogether if they anticipate the high level of distress they will be feeling in certain social contexts. Another symptom is when a person overanalyzes their interactions with other people to identify the flaws in their behavior and just think of all the bad things they did and how they should have behaved instead, which leads to a loop of thoughts, which itself causes high levels of anxiety. The physical symptoms can sometimes accompany social anxiety disorder, like fast heartbeat, trembling, sweating, trouble catching your breath, muscle tension. Sometimes your mind goes blank and you have a stomach ache. So what are the triggers? Social anxiety disorder can be generalized or specific to certain situations. If someone has the specific social anxiety disorder, they might be triggered only by performing or speaking publicly and not in making small talk at dinner, for example. In the more common social anxiety, everyday experiences can be hard to go through. Some of the triggers are making eye contact, eating in front of others because they're scared of spilling and getting judged, being the center of attention or being too exposed, talking to strangers in parties, being asked to read aloud in front of everyone in class because the person might feel that they're not doing well and embarrass themselves, or making a phone call when another person can hear them. So, as you can see, even the smallest details of everyday life can be a trigger of negative thoughts that cause extreme anxiety and fear. The triggers and symptoms might differ between a person and another, and it can even change over time. They might increase when going through a period of stress. It's important to note that avoiding situations might make a person feel better in the short term, but the second day, the anxiety will most likely be present. So, what causes social anxiety disorder? Like most mental health disorders, research supports the idea that social anxiety disorder arises from a complex interaction between biological and environmental factors. In our brain, there is this area called amygdala, which is responsible for controlling our fear response. Studies have shown that some individuals have an overactive amygdala, which causes a very high fear response, which leads to more anxiety in social situations. The amygdala is not the only thing in the brain that might affect anxiety. There's a chemical, or more precisely, a neurotransmitter, that is called serotonin, which helps regulate anxiety, happiness, and mood. So, low levels of serotonin are associated with depression. But for people with social anxiety disorder, the levels of serotonin in the brain are found to be high, which causes more anxiety and puts a person at risk of developing this disorder. Now, a lot of environmental factors can put a person at risk of developing social anxiety disorder, like bullying, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, new situations, new social or work demands, growing up as a child in a controlling or overprotective environment. All these factors and in intense fear and anxiety that might stay for a long period of time and trigger the symptoms we talked about. So, left untreated, social anxiety disorder can disrupt everyday functioning and might lead to other mental health disorders like substance abuse problems. So you might ask, what is the connection between substance abuse and social anxiety disorder? And well, for many people, going out with friends to a party, for example, involves drinking alcohol and taking drugs. Now, if you suffer from social anxiety and are exposed to this kind of environment, you will find yourself probably drinking to relieve yourself from the anxiety and fear that is being induced by the party itself. The drugs, they target the reward centers in the brain. So when you consume drugs or alcohol, you will feel a sensation of pleasure, which is very appealing to a person who suffers from social anxiety because it provides the opposite of being stressed. However, it is important to note that this sensation of pleasure comes for a very short period of time. And after a few hours come the feelings of depression, irritability, and anxiety. And this is true even if you try to drink moderately. Studies showed that 22% of people with a social anxiety disorder will misuse or become dependent on alcohol at some point in their lives. Feeling the need to drink alcohol or smoke marijuana or take any other kind of drug, or even take more medication than prescribed every time a person goes out or interacts with people at work or at school is very dangerous because it puts the person at risk of developing an addiction to the substances. Abusing the substances to relieve ourselves from the fear and anxiety that comes with the social world is not helping with it's not helping dealing with the social anxiety, but it is only adding problems. So, what are other ways to deal with social anxiety other than using substances? So, first, you might think about challenging your mentality. This might help. People who have social anxiety have negative thoughts and beliefs that contribute to their fears and anxiety. So, challenging these negative thoughts is an effective way to reduce the symptoms. It would require first to identify the automatic negative thoughts that pop in your head, and then asking yourself, how likely is what you're thinking going to happen? Try to turn them into more positive, realistic views of the situation. Second, it's important to be aware of the unhelpful thinking that is done. Here I listed four thinking styles that we should be aware of. First, the mind reading style is when a person assumes they know what other people are thinking and that they see you in the same negative way that you actually see yourself. Fortune telling is predicting something bad is going to happen. Catastrophizing is blowing things out of proportion. And finally, personalizing is assume that people are focusing on you in a negative way, or that what's going on with other people has to do with you. When the person dealing with social anxiety becomes aware of the thinking they're doing, they will be able to challenge these negative thoughts and try to approach the situation from a more positive perspective. Third, many changes in our bodies happen when we're anxious. And one of the first changes is that you begin to breathe quickly. So hyperventilation throws off the balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide in your body, which leads to more physical symptoms of anxiety, such as dizziness, you feel like you're suffocating, increased heart rate, and muscle tension. So, learning to slow your breathing down can help bring your physical symptoms of anxiety back under control. So, one technique is to inhale through your nose for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 2, and then exhale through your mouth for 6. So, 4 in, 2 hold, 6 out. Doing this over and over can help control your breath and the rest of the physical symptoms when you're going out with your friends. Fourth, avoiding certain situations only reinforces anxiety. It is important to face those situations. However, it can feel overwhelming and very challenging to do so. This is why it's important to take small steps and not try to face it all at once. It is also important to use the skills you learned to deal with the physical symptoms while facing our fears. And these skills, like the breathing exercises and thinking about your thoughts in a different way, this can be learned through informative webinars or classes that you can find on YouTube. So basically, you can find these skills anywhere. Finally, it might be helpful to adopt an anti-anxiety lifestyle, which means avoiding caffeine, getting active, meditating, maybe volunteering at an animal shelter if you think animal company helps, and getting enough sleep. Now, these techniques might help, but sometimes when a person is dealing with social anxiety, it is significantly recommended to reach out to a professional like a counselor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. And treatment for social anxiety might include cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which is focused on breaking down the problems that are faced and turn the negative thoughts and feelings to something more positive. The psychologist assists you to learn to respond more positively, and through practice over time, you get better at it. Psychotherapy is also another treatment that is thought to be beneficial to deal with social anxiety. Systematic desensitization, which is also called exposure therapy, is part of the therapy context and can extend to everyday life. So basically, the psychologist teaches the person some breathing exercises and skills, like we talked about, to deal with the triggers, and then exposes the person gradually to these triggers. It can start by imagining the triggers and then by being exposed to them in real life situations. Along with therapy, some people find medications to be helpful, and sometimes it's necessary. You might have heard of these medications like Prozac and Zoloft. Some of them tackle serotonin, the neurotransmitter we talked about previously, and others tackle both serotonin and norepinephrine, which is another chemical in the brain. So these medications help reduce the overfiring in the brain, and it balances the excess of chemicals that we have. So if the person is dealing with both social anxiety and substance abuse, when the person is suffering from these co-occurring disorders, it is important to find a treatment program that addresses all the challenges together, because when you treat each disorder alone, there is a chance of missing the underlying connection between the two. And this can cause problems on the long run. So recovery from a dual diagnosis of social anxiety disorder and substance abuse is hard, but is entirely achievable. And sometimes it helps to have a good network of trusted people to support you throughout your journey. So some take-home messages. In contrast to everyday nervousness, social anxiety disorder includes high fear and anxiety and a tendency to avoid social contacts, which interferes with the functioning of everyday life. The symptoms can be physical, emotional, and behavioral. The triggers are present everywhere, which makes it very hard to deal with. The risk factors are a combination of biological and environmental factors. Drugs and alcohol are used to relieve a person from the fear and anxiety felt in social context. However, relying on these substances to feel better only increases the chance of addiction and does not help with the anxiety on the long run. Alternative ways like breathing exercises, being aware of the unhelpful thinking, and adopting an anti-anxiety lifestyle are better ways to deal with social anxiety. Seeking professional help is crucial when your life is disrupted by anxiety, substance abuse, or both. So this is it. Now the floor is open for any questions, any thoughts, any comments that you have. So feel free to say anything. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so yes, it does. So it's not only in social events, it's also in professional settings, at work, dealing with coworkers, preparing for a presentation, the techniques, the breathing exercises, the training your mind to think in a more positive way, to be aware of your thoughts is very important, even though you don't have the social anxiety disorder, but anxiety is everywhere in our life. And it can be very interesting to get educated, to be able to deal with all of that in all kinds of situations. Anyone else has something to say? Okay, so Marianne asked, I was wondering if someone is predisposed to social anxiety from birth or if there are triggers. Okay, so what is important to know is that the triggers, okay, so you have triggers in social situations or in work, or you know that there are stuff that trigger you, and these will trigger symptoms, right? But for the predisposition, we know that it's a combination of environmental factors and biological. And the environmental is what I talked about, like being abused or bullied. But for the biological ones, we don't have evidence yet of a gene that predisposes us of developing this disorder, but we know that we are more likely to get to develop this disorder if someone in our family has the disorder as well. And this might be because of some behavioral factors, because we might learn from the behaviors of our parents, and our anxiety can sometimes be learned. But till now, we don't really have genetic evidence. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, so is there anything we can do to our kids to avoid suffering from this disorder when they grow up? I guess what is important is to be aware if they're going through something in school, like if they're bullied or something like this. And I guess to have this healthy environment at home, welcoming discussions about everything that is going on with their lives, uh, for them to be able to come and approach you if they're feeling anxious or if they're feeling anything at all. This might help them. Also, you can teach them the techniques that you learned, and this can help them deal with situations when you are not next to them. What about schools? Are they adopting screening problems among them? What do you mean by screening problems? Risk factors, okay. Do you mean like if in schools are there like risk factors?
Hi, Zoya.
Hi, doctor.
I mean, if there is some program implemented in school to screen children who might develop a social anxiety later on. Are you aware of this?
To be honest, no, I am not very aware of this. However, I know that in some schools they have counselors that are always open to discuss anything with the children, but I am sure that there are some articles and some research studies done on this because it is very relevant to a work or school context. But I am not aware if there are, like, what are the programs that are implemented in schools. Okay, so is the disorder related to any age group? Okay, so normally it starts in mid-teenage years, so maybe the average is 13, but this disorder is present in adulthood and childhood. So we can't really put a time frame to it. So you can diagnose it in children, in teenagers, or in adults. Now, the component is the high anxiety, the avoidance, the disruption in everyday life, and the fact that it stays for more than 6 months, and and it's not just like anxiety during a stressful period, but something that stays for more than 6 months. So do you think that forcing someone to take the stage is a good way to help them with anxiety? I feel like my personal opinion, I feel like forcing someone to do something just like very directly facing the stage all at once won't really help the person because it might put the person in a very, very stressful situations and they might not learn anything. So, like I said, it's important if you want to face your fears. It's important to face your fears, but to do so, it's important to do it gradually, like starting with imagining the situation, for example, and always using the skills you learned while facing the situation. So through imagination, and then maybe you start by doing the things step by step and then achieving it at the end. But forcing someone on the stage at once might not be such a good idea. You're welcome. Okay, so the meeting will end in 2 minutes. Thank you. If someone has something to say, now's the time. Okay, I guess. So thank you so much for attending Lamsa's Wednesday webinar series. It was great talking to everyone. Thank you for joining. And yes, thank you guys. Okay. Okay, thank you everyone.